So, what actually happens when a guy hears no after proposing? Back in 7th grade, my teacher brought his girlfriend to class and popped the question in front of everyone. She turned him down, right there in front of a room full of kids. That one moment became gossip for the entire school year. By the end of the year, he had transferred to another school. Honestly, what was he thinking? Maybe he assumed, she can't say no in front of children. Well, turns out yes, she absolutely can. Here's another one. My mom's boyfriend proposed just 3 months after they started dating. She was 40, already divorced once, and felt marriage talk was way too early. She said no, and he told her he wouldn't ask again. True to his word, he never did. But guess what? They've been together for over 25 years, still not married, still going strong. Then there was me. I used to jokingly ask my girlfriend to marry me in silly, sarcastic ways, and she'd always laugh and say no. I did this so much that when I finally proposed for real, with a ring, she casually rejected me without even looking. Everyone around us gasped. But when she realized I was serious, she immediately changed her answer. We've been happily married for 17 years now. Another story. During my freshman year, a foreign student I had barely spoken to called my dad on Christmas morning and asked for my hand in marriage. My dad, clueless about my life, assumed this was my boyfriend and said yes. He thought I'd be thrilled. Spoiler, I was not. At a restaurant once, I witnessed a disastrous proposal. The guy had arranged a big family dinner and hid the ring in his girlfriend's piña colada. She refused the drink, clearly uninterested. He kept pushing, "Come on, try it." She pushed back, saying she wouldn't drink it. Finally, she snapped. "I can't marry someone who doesn't respect my boundaries." She walked out. Later, when he revealed the ring in the drink, she slapped him and stormed off for good. Painful to watch, but honestly, that's what happens when you propose without even discussing marriage first. Another one. My girlfriend was finishing her master's while I still had 2 years left in my PhD program. I floated the idea of marriage, and she said, "If you ask formally, I'll say yes. But if you love me, give me a year to live on my own first." I agreed. A year later, she was engaged to someone else. Honestly, I count that as dodging a bullet. Then there's the guy who supported his girlfriend through school, helped her get off drugs, and even looked at houses with her. When he brought up marriage, she broke down and admitted she couldn't marry him because she was waiting for her ex to get out of prison. Sure enough, she left him soon after and went back to that guy. Brutal. One woman shared her side. She proposed to her boyfriend. He said no. She was furious since they'd talked about marriage before, but later discovered his fear came from his parents' messy divorce. After long conversations about what marriage really meant, he realized it wasn't about a huge wedding, but about legal and emotional security. They eventually tied the knot, and 5 years later, he still says it was the best day of his life. Another man got a yes initially, but when they told her parents, they demanded she break it off because he was black. She chose her family over him. He moved on, married someone wonderful, and now has 3 kids. Meanwhile, his ex is struggling with addiction. One woman said she initially told her partner no, because she was shocked. He had just finished a 1,000-mile cycling tour and surprised her with a proposal. She needed time to think. A week later, she said yes. They've been happily married for 7 years now. Even jewelers see these disasters. One jeweler recalled a man who bragged about proposing on the big screen at a ball game. The jeweler noticed he never mentioned what she liked. It was all about him. She had a bad feeling. And sure enough, the girlfriend said no. So, if there's one big lesson here, talk about marriage before proposing. The proposal itself can be a surprise, but the idea of marriage should not be. Otherwise, you risk embarrassment and heartbreak. Final story. A friend of mine proposed too early, and his girlfriend said no. She told him she'd only marry him if they bought a house first. 10 years later, he's still too scared to try again, but now she wants fireworks, a beach, and an audience. She always imagined a diamond ring, the kind she saw in TikTok videos. Now that most of her friends are getting engaged, she wants him to propose again. But honestly, it feels less like romance, and more like both of them waiting around for something undefined. The real question is, waiting for what? Because from the outside, it doesn't look like marriage is the destination. Their expectations clearly don't align, and when that happens, no one walks away satisfied. 10 years in, it's starting to look less like love and more like sunk cost fallacy. I don't know the full story, but But I'd bet this isn't their only big mismatch. Next story. I had everything planned, and when I finally asked, she said, "Not right now." That answer put a damper on the entire weekend. The hardest part came afterwards. So many people had heard I was proposing and congratulated me before I could tell them she'd turned me down. Honestly, that should have been the red flag to walk away, but we didn't. We were each other's first everything, and history made us hold on. Deep down, though her doubts never disappeared, eventually, I had to admit that we wanted completely different things. Any compromise would have left one of us resentful. We had been there for each other during tough times, but what worked back then didn't work anymore. Good people don't always make a good match. After 7 more months, we ended things, both moving on to new lives. Later, we each found partners better suited to us. Next story. I turned down a proposal because he was an addict. I wasn't, but I was young and naive. He reacted by marrying another woman. Within 6 months, she had 2 children, and he adopted them. She used him for a green card, divorced him, and now he's paying child support. I only know this because his mother awkwardly shared the story with my parents years later. But by then, I'd moved on. Broke things off with him at 17. Now I'm 34. Happily married with 4 kids. No regrets. Next story. My high school sweetheart and I had a rocky 9-year relationship, breaking up and getting back together through college. On one trip, right as we were leaving, she said, "I hope you're planning to propose." I had a ring in my bag, but her comment killed the moment. The trip turned sour, and not long after, she married someone else. A few years later, I met the person who truly felt right. I traded in that first ring, proposed, and now I've been married for 19 years. My wife and kids are everything I could have hoped for. Next story. My dad proposed to my mom 3 times. Each time, she laughed, accepted the ring, but never took him seriously. They've been miserable together for decades. I'm 31 now, and they live in separate spaces under the same roof. My dad admits he regrets it, but whenever I ask why he stayed, he just says, "Because she's your mother." That's it. If someone says no, take it seriously and move on. Narrator's commentary. I thought this thread would be full of sweet, wholesome stories. Turns out, not so much. Some are hilarious, some heartbreaking, and a few strangely uplifting. Next story. For my partner's 30th birthday, I asked if she wanted an engagement ring or a dishwasher. She picked the dishwasher. 14 years later, we're still together. In her defense, I'd always been anti-marriage, and she assumed I was joking. Honestly, washing dishes by hand is the worst, so I think she chose wisely. Next story. A friend of mine almost got pressured into an engagement. She was 19, dating a guy for just 4 months. When her strict parents told her he'd be proposing on New Year's Eve in front of the entire family. They even threatened to kick her out if she refused. She dreaded it. Luckily, I drunkenly called her at 11:58 p.m. Kept her on the line past midnight, and completely ruined his moment. He never asked. Funny twist, I ended up marrying her myself, and we've been together for 28 years. Next story. I spent an entire year casually asking my boyfriend, "Want to get married?" He always said yes, but when I asked if I could tell my parents, he always said no. Finally, on a weekend trip, he pulled out letters he'd secretly exchanged with my parents about proposing properly. That was 6 years ago. Now, I honestly can't tell which of these stories are supposed to be happy or sad. The lines blur. Next story. My girlfriend once turned me down, and we cried together in the car afterward. She loved me but wasn't ready. Strangely, it ended up strengthening us. 2 years later, she said yes with excitement, and now we've been married 6 years with a beautiful daughter. Next story. On a trip to Las Vegas in 2006, I saw a magician's show where a guy appeared on stage from a box and proposed. The woman froze. She clasped her hands but said nothing. After an unbearable silence, the magician saved the moment by announcing to the crowd that she said yes. We cheered, but it was obvious she hadn't. For the rest of the night, she sat alone while her boyfriend huddled with his family. Painful to watch. Next story. I've asked my girlfriend twice, and she's said no both times. The last time, she told me, "Why ruin everything?" Given her rough first marriage, I understand. She's admitted she doesn't want to keep rejecting me, but she's not ready to say yes either. I'm willing to wait. Next story. I proposed on a quiet Sicilian beach at sunset, just the 2 of us. He said no, not because he didn't want to marry me, But because he was shocked, I asked before he did. It came out wrong. Later, he admitted he absolutely wanted marriage, just not like that. 9 months later, he proposed on my birthday, and I said yes. We've now been happily married for 10 years. I was head over heels in love with her and wanted to marry her, but she said no. Despite that, our relationship continued for about a year. During that time, I kept hoping she might eventually change her mind. We had countless conversations about the seriousness of our relationship, and every time I brought up marriage, her response was always the same. Why can't you just get over it? Eventually, I ended things. It took me a while to realize she simply didn't love me the way I loved her, and that I deserved better. It should have clicked sooner, but I didn't want to end things prematurely. When I call it quits, it's final, and I wanted to be absolutely sure. In the end, it all worked out for the best. My now husband proposed to me, and we've been happily married for almost 10 years. Next story. Years ago, I managed a beautiful bed and breakfast mansion in the Hudson Valley. We hosted weddings nearly every weekend and ran the restaurant otherwise. One winter evening, a man gave us a heads up that he was going to propose during dinner. The dining room only had about 15 people that night, so it was quiet and intimate. He got down on one knee, and she softly said, "Can you stand back up? We need to talk. I can't marry you." She was kind and gentle, but we all saw the heartbreak on his face. The rest of their dinner was painfully quiet. Still, of all the ways someone could be rejected, hers was at least compassionate. Hopefully, their talk afterward helped them figure out whether they weren't right for each other or just needed more time. The fact that neither stormed out was probably a good sign. Next story. My wife said yes when I proposed, but I was nervous, until the actual wedding day. She had turned down 2 men before me and admitted she was a commitment phobie. Her matron of honor even spent the night before the wedding sleeping by the front door just in case my wife tried to leave. If she had, the plan was to call me so I could carry out a backup plan. On the day of the wedding, she nearly backed out, but in the end, she walked in, and we got married. We just celebrated our 10th anniversary. Even now, she sometimes panics when she realizes how long we've been together, despite the fact that we have 2 kids, a house, and a mortgage. For anyone dealing with a commitment-phobic partner, communication is everything. I told her months in advance that I planned to propose, and I listened to how she wanted it done. Pro tip: never propose in public unless you're absolutely sure. She's into that. Next story. I know a guy who proposed and initially got a yes, but it turned into a no. It was her birthday, and he suggested throwing a barbecue with both families, invited parents, siblings, cousins, grandparents, everyone. What she didn't know was that he planned to propose during dinner. Marriage had never even been discussed. She said yes in the moment to avoid chaos, but later admitted she didn't want to marry him. They broke up soon after. To this day, we tease him whenever he invites us to a barbecue. "You're not going to propose again, are you?" It always gets a laugh, though I hope he learned from that experience. Next story. I was hanging out with friends at a comic shop when one of them clicked on his computer and turned the monitor toward MIT showed a Taco Bell wedding package. On a whim, I proposed right there. She said no. A few years later, she told me when and where we'd be getting married. Now, we've been together for 10 years and married for several of them. I love that woman to death and back. Next story. I once found out the woman I was dating had also been seeing a friend I introduced her to. Later, he proposed to her in a restaurant while I happened to be eating there too. I heard the clapping and cheering when she said yes. Thankfully, I was seated on the other side and didn't have to watch the whole thing. That is, until they passed me on the highway on my way home. They eventually got married, but divorced when he cheated. As for me, I married later in life. My wife and I have faced many medical struggles together, but we're still going strong. Still, that earlier experience felt like having someone stomp on an already broken foot. Absolutely brutal. Next story. When I was 21, I got involved with one of my college professors who was much older than me. Somehow, it worked for nearly 10 years. We built a life with a house and a dog, but about halfway through, we started taking separate vacations because our interests didn't align. One day, I went to his sister's house to pick him up after a trip to Thailand. While unpacking, surrounded by dirty clothes and trinkets, he handed me a glittery bag. Inside was an engagement ring. Shocked and panicked, I said yes in the moment, then immediately called my best friend. She told me it was okay to say no, so I went back and told him I didn't want to marry him. He simply asked me not to tell. anyone he had proposed. The very next day, on our 4-hour drive home, he admitted that during his last trip to Thailand, he had gotten a happy ending. I was furious. Not only had he cheated, but he had lied by omission for a year, during which we'd barely been intimate. I broke up with him right there, and we endured the most awkward 4-hour drive. The irony. I later married a wonderful man who happens to be a massage therapist. So yes, I get all the happy endings, and the humor of it isn't lost on me. Next story. I once dated someone for 6.5 years. When I finally proposed, she told me I had waited too long and admitted she was developing feelings for an assistant professor she worked with. She spent 2 months wavering back and forth before I finally ended things. They married and had a child, which in hindsight was for the best since I'm sterile and she ultimately wanted kids. Next story. She and I had been best friends for years before dating. Whenever I brought up marriage, she said she would love it, convinced she meant it. I even asked her mom for approval, and she happily gave it. Months later, when I finally proposed, she was furious. She said her mother had told her I'd asked, and she called me an idiot for thinking she'd ever want to get married, especially since her parents' marriage and divorce had been so messy. I was blindsided. I had planned a perfect day, ending with a private dinner at a fancy restaurant. When I asked why she'd always told me she wanted to get married, she said she thought it was just role-playing. I still don't fully understand. Apparently, I was just supposed to know she never wanted marriage because of her parents' history. Next story. My ex once proposed to me during a reunion show I was playing with my old band. We hadn't been together for 8 months after a nasty breakup. He was deep into Kuwanan at the time. Without my knowledge, he invited both of our families. In the middle of the set, he brought drinks for the band and slipped a ring into mine. On stage, in front of everyone, he asked me to marry him even though I had a new boyfriend, now my husband. I was furious. I downed the shot, left the ring, and kept playing, though it completely ruined the rest of the show. It felt manipulative, especially since the concert's theme was about women feeling safe in public spaces. My all-female band didn't support me, so I walked away from the scene entirely after that. Next story. I was once proposed to by a man 12 years older than me who had a child. I knew I didn't want to be a stepmother, so I told him no. I cared for her as if she were my own child, and that was what he wanted. Eventually, I got pregnant, and after the baby was born, he proposed again. Tragically, our child passed away shortly after, though the wedding plans still went forward. His grandparents even paid for a beautiful ring, but the overwhelming expectation that I should care for his daughter in place of mine became too much, and I ran away. He pulled me back, but I later discovered that he had been cheating on me after our baby's death. That was the end of us. This story is true, and the drama still lingers. Next story. One of my exes was an unusual mix-addict, stripper, and accountant. She proposed to me while we were both on MDMA. I told her I'd rather answer when I wasn't high. I think her trip went badly, because she dumped me 2 days later. Honestly, I don't regret it. Another proposal was strange in a different way. I had met the love of my life, but we had only been together for about 6 months when I asked her to marry me. She said yes, but afterward her energy shifted, and she admitted it felt rushed. I was hurt, but suggested we could redo it when she was ready. Thankfully, it worked out. We eventually married, and we've been happily together for 8 years. Next story. My girlfriend and I were walking around our old Ivy League campus when I proposed with my late mother's ring, which I had been carrying in my wallet. She said no. My sister had even bought a fancy bottle of champagne for the occasion. Heartbroken, I booked the night train home. I didn't want to be surrounded by crowds after that rejection. Honestly, the silence of the sleeper car may have been worse. In the end though, I found the right person, someone who helped repair the damage. Next story. This one is about my uncle and aunt. One evening, after dinner, he proposed to her on the beach. She said no, explaining she wanted a man who knew what he truly wanted, and she wasn't ready yet. They kept dating, had more conversations, and a few years later, he proposed again. That time she said yes. Today, they have 5 kids including triplet, girls, and they're my favorite cousins. Sometimes, a no just means not yet. Next story. I was once told no during what turned into a successful proposal. We were lying in bed after an intimate moment. It wasn't the grand proposal I had envisioned, but it felt right. I said, "I love you, and I know you love me. Will you marry me?" She looked at me and said, "No." Normally, that would sound crushing, But it was more of an inside joke. Back when we first started dating, she came over very late one night around 2 a.m. I didn't want to drive her home, so I gave her my bed while I took a blanket and slept on the floor. I was freezing, and when she noticed, she told me to climb into bed with her. I did, and while lying there, I asked if I could kiss her. She giggled and said, "No." I respected that, kept talking and flirting, and later she let me kiss her. When I asked why she had initially said no, she explained that I was the first guy who ever asked, and she wanted to test whether I would listen. So, when I proposed and she jokingly said no, it was a callback to that night. Then she laughed, said yes, and we got engaged. Next story. I turned down my husband's first proposal because it felt too soon. We hadn't yet had the deep conversations that marriage requires. Surprisingly, he agreed, and we stayed together. Eventually, we had those talks, and now we've been married for 43 years. A no doesn't always mean the relationship is over. Sometimes it's just a pause. Both proposals were casual, which was perfect for me. If the first one had been some big public spectacle, it would have ended us, because that would have shown he didn't know me at all. Next story. I proposed to an ex 3 times, and each time she refused. Her excuse was always that it wasn't the right time, that she needed to figure things out. Turns out she was cheating on me with a coworker, just waiting for the chance to leave. Me, thankfully, I was the one who ended things. She was furious that I gave up, not realizing I already knew about her affair. Honestly, I dodged 3 bullets. Today, I've been happily married to my wife for 2 years and counting. Next story. 3 years into our relationship, about 6 months after her mother passed away. We went on holiday in Corfu. I proposed on one knee, but she burst into tears and ran off. She explained later that she did want to marry me, but the timing felt wrong. For the next 8 years, I proposed once a year never, on one knee but every time she gently declined. Eventually, I realized it might never happen. Then one New Year's Eve, she asked why I hadn't proposed that year. When I told her I thought she didn't want me to, she said, "Well, you should have." I jokingly started to kneel, but she stopped me and said, "Not now, later." About 7 months after that, under the stars and an olive tree in Colonia, I proposed again. That time she said yes. We're now approaching our 18th anniversary. Next story. My mom, at 18, cheated on my father who was 19 and a devout Christian with another man, just 17 at the time. That man was my sister's biological father. When my mom found out she was pregnant with me, she wanted an abortion, but my father fought for me. My mom eventually left my dad for that other man, moving into his place. He turned out to be abusive. My sister and I suffered, and my mother endured years of violence. Outwardly, he seemed friendly, but in private, he was a monster. Between the ages of 2 and 6, I witnessed constant abuse. I even begged my father and later my grandfather to stop him permanently, which deeply unsettled them. Eventually, my father confronted my mother about what was happening. That moment sparked something in her. One night, she woke me and my sister quietly, telling us to pack. We escaped to my grandmother's farmhouse with just a few bags. It was one of the greatest feelings of relief I've ever known. Despite everything, my mother rebuilt her life. Years later, she met a good man. She rejected his proposals 5 times before finally agreeing to marry him on July 7, 2007. They're still together. Today. Next story. My wife rejected my first proposal, so I waited nearly a year to try again. When she had almost lost hope, I set up something special. She worked at a chocolate shop, and the day before Easter it was packed. I asked a stranger to help me out. His job was to order a custom box of chocolates with a ring hidden inside. My wife actually ended up helping assemble it. I also called the shop, asking her coworkers to make sure she was the one to deliver it next door. Meanwhile, I waited inside a pottery shop across the plaza, a popular spot for dates where people painted pottery and drank wine. When she came in, wearing bunny ears and looking for a guy in a white shirt, she was so confused to see me. She kept insisting the box was for someone else until I told her to open it. She was still puzzled until I pulled out the ring and proposed. She said yes, and the whole pottery shop erupted in cheers. When she returned to her workplace, all her coworkers were waiting at the door to celebrate. The crowd was screaming and cheering as she walked in. I didn't mind it at all, but in the chaos, I ended up stuck outside. My part was already done anyway. Still, I never really understood this whole thing because I've often heard of guys getting upset when someone else proposes nearby. Is it really just that they're worried the idea of marriage will suddenly pop into their girlfriend's head? And if so, why does that bother them so much? What exactly are they afraid of? Anyway, OP, that was adorable. Great job. It could have turned out badly if the guy had run off with the ring. Though, so good thing you trusted the right person. Wait, did you actually hand him the ring to hide in the cake, or did he pull it out afterward? Honestly, I'm not sure. Either way, I'm glad you found someone reliable to help you pull it off. Next story. My dad proposed to my stepmom multiple times. Every time, she said no. The last time, she added, and don't ask me again. One day, after work, he took a wrong turn while driving. She asked where they were headed, and he said, "To get married? You told me to stop asking." Somehow, it worked. They'd been together about 25 years now. Narrator's note: do not do this. Please don't. Life usually doesn't work out that way, and moves like that only upset your partner. It's a total rom-com gesture that rarely plays well in real life. Next story. My wife and I did eventually get married. But our situation was more complicated. She's Ukrainian, living abroad. And nervous about moving to the US, she said she didn't want marriage but still wanted us to be together forever. Eventually, when she was ready, she was ready. Next story. In my family, my mom, my sisters, and I all said no the first time we were proposed to, each for different reasons. Still, we all ended up marrying the same men later, after they asked again. Most of us are happy, though I'll admit one of my brothers-in-law is a bit of a jerk. Personally, when I was first asked, I was shocked. Marriage wasn't something I had even thought about, and it took time to sort through my feelings. I was proposed to around Easter and didn't say yes until July 4th. None of us like surprises or pressure. So honestly, a real discussion beforehand would have been much better. Thankfully, none of our proposals were public. Next story. I actually waited so long to propose that my girlfriend warned me if I didn't propose within the year, she would do it herself. Of course, I couldn't let that happen. We've now been together 28 years, married for 20. My advice: never propose in public, never pressure your partner, and don't rush it. Spend real time together, live together for years, and know each other inside and out first. Next story. We started dating in spring 1984. And from the very night we met, it was love. She practically moved in the next day. In fall 1985, I proposed, but she said no. I asked a few more times over the next 6 months and finally gave up. Then, in 1989, over 4 years later, we were driving when she suddenly said, "Remember that question you asked? You should ask again." I didn't even realize what she meant until she spelled it out. We married in 1991, had 3 kids, and are still going strong. Next story. My ex and I had talked about marriage. I always said I didn't want a big gesture or a huge wedding, because the important part is the commitment itself, not an expensive show. We'd been together for 6 years, and I thought he knew me inside and out. He knew I didn't get along with my parents. He knew I was deathly allergic to pollen. So how did he propose? By hiding a ring inside a massive bouquet of tropical flowers at my parents' house. I ended up having an allergic reaction so bad my lungs shut down, and I had to be rushed to the ER. Surprise! He's now my ex. Next story. I once suggested a proposal idea. I told her, think about it, take a few months to decide. Don't answer right away unless the answer is no. If it's no, tell me immediately. She didn't say no, but she instantly became cold and distant. Eventually, I assumed her answer was no, and when I told her that, she got angry. She insisted she had made it clear from the beginning that it was no. At first, I was confused. I had asked her not to handle it that way. Then it hit me. She didn't respect me enough to avoid the one thing I specifically asked her not to do. So, good riddance. Next story. I work at a luxury hotel, and in the past year, I've had 2 guests call ahead to ask how we could help with a proposal. Normally, we'll send champagne and handwritten notes for birthdays or anniversaries, but what do you even write for a proposal? We don't promise anything, we just provide a list of extras they can purchase, plus spa services. Both times, it was obvious. The proposal was going to be a surprise, and they were trying to outsource the effort, but honestly, the effort should come from the one proposing. And, as others have said, it should never be a surprise. At checkout, it was clear in both cases, the answer had been a very obvious no. If you're not sure, you're not ready. Next story. After my biological grandfather, terrible man, was finally kicked out, my grandmother raised my dad and aunt alone. Years later, she met a handyman with his own problems. He'd grown up with 7 siblings, most of them in prison. He was the good one, his only struggles were gambling and drinking. She helped him through rehab, which wasn't common. In the 70s, he even let her manage all his finances. At first, they didn't live together, but when he finally moved in years later, he proposed. But it wasn't romantic. He framed it as a way to save money on taxes and cut down on paperwork. She refused. She wasn't going to accept a proposal under those terms. It took him nearly 20 years to tell her he loved her. When he finally proposed again, he did it right with a romantic dinner, the family invited, and everything planned. Before he even finished the question, she said yes. They married after 22 years together and had 20 more years of marriage before he sadly passed away from decades of smoking and asbestos exposure. She's nearly 90 now and still misses him every day. My other grandfather, the awful one, is still alive, which feels unfair. But that's life. Next story. When I proposed, her response was, "What made you think I wanted to get married?" My thoughts. Well, we'd been together 8 years, owned a house and property, and were both finally divorced. But from there, everything went downhill. I'm staying until my daughter finishes school in November, but after that, I doubt we'll still be together. I'll be 55, unemployed, probably, homeless, and stuck in a place I hate. Fun times. Next story. I ended up breaking a friend's heart. We weren't romantically involved, but we were very close and spent nearly all our time together. We admitted feelings for each other but never acted on them. Over the years, no matter who we dated, we'd always circle back into each other's lives, like a movie. Eventually, I asked her, but she said no. That didn't change our friendship. Later, I met someone else she didn't know. Then one day, she told me she could only see her future with me and would say yes if I asked again. That's when I broke her heart by telling her I was already engaged. We never spoke again after that. Narrator's note. OPB, don't feel guilty. You both had an unspoken agreement not to take it further. She just waited too long, and that's not on you. You had to live your life, and it sounds like you're happy now. Good for you. I hope she eventually finds the right person for her, too. But at some point, you have to take control of your own path. That situation wasn't working out, so you searched for a different direction. After all, it's not as though you were ever really with her. Anyway, my point is that you did fine, OP. Next story. I was heartbroken for months, but eventually I got past it. A big part of why was because my feelings were dismissed. It felt like if I truly loved her, then it shouldn't have mattered that she wasn't ready, even though she could never give me a real reason. We were together for 3 years, and then I stayed around for another 3. Most of which were long distance because of graduate school. I worked hard, built connections with a lab at her school, and was planning to transfer there the next semester. That's when she began emotionally cheating on me with a guy friend I already knew had feelings for her. We'd talked about it before, and I told her I trusted her to handle that friendship in a way that respected our relationship. She promised she would. Instead, she gave me an ultimatum. Either we tried polyamory or we broke up. We gave poly a shot for a few months, but it quickly became obvious that it wasn't working for any of us. She broke things off. Now, I'm married to my beautiful, trustworthy wife. We've been together for 5 years and just celebrated our first anniversary. I no longer wake up every night in a panic with nightmares, though it did take me at least 3 years to finally heal. Next story. My grandfather proposed to my grandmother 5 times. She turned him down the first 4, but on the 5th time he told her, "If you say no this time, I'll never ask again." She said yes, partly because she was worried no one else would ever propose. She was just 19 then, but she grew into one of the most incredible women anyone had ever met. Strangers often tell me how lucky I am to have her as my grandmother. My grandfather became semi-famous. There's even a movie made about him, played by a household name actor. The story portrayed him as an amazing man, but truthfully, he got the better deal. She was extraordinary. Next story. This one wasn't a marriage proposal but more of a do you want to go out situation. She and I had been best friends forever, always laughing and doing things together. One day, I thought, why not take it a step further and call ourselves boyfriend and girlfriend? She would have been the first black woman I'd ever dated, which Seemed important to note. She said no. She explained, "You're a great guy. I have a lot of fun with you, but you're a white Jewish guy and I'm a black woman. It wouldn't work out." I accepted that, and we stayed friends. A couple of weeks later, she called me up. "Guess what? I have a boyfriend." She described him and, it turned out, he was a white Jewish guy. Soon after, I moved across the country, not because of her but for a great job opportunity. I never heard from her again. Next story, this one's mine. She broke up with me shortly after I proposed, saying if marriage was what I wanted, then I deserved someone who wouldn't make me wait. At the time, I was devastated. But looking back, she was right. The way I proposed was also foolish, though I truly meant it. We'd only been together a couple of years. I was 21 and she was 19, and I hadn't even talked to her about it beforehand. We both went on to have other serious relationships, but we stayed friends. 6 years later, we reconnected romantically. Now, 4 years into that relationship, I'm grateful every single day. Next story, my wife and I just agreed to get married and did it. No proposal. But once, at a restaurant, we witnessed a bad one. A guy got down on one knee, poured his heart out, and she said no. He stood up, slapped his thighs, and said, "Well, that's that," before walking out. She sat frozen at the table long after he left. We stayed an hour, and she was still there. I imagine things didn't end well for them. Honestly, the guy got up after a failed proposal like a stereotypical dad leaving a party. Well, that's that. See ya later. Sure, there were probably deeper issues, but the image still makes me laugh. Next story. My in-laws are common-law married. When I was dating my husband, they argued often because my mother-in-law wanted a courthouse wedding, while my father-in-law refused. After my husband and I tied the knot, I guess it sparked something in him, because he finally bought a ring and proposed. She said no. They stayed together regardless, but now she lives with us, and he gives her an allowance. It's a strange arrangement. Next story. In college, I tutored students, and one of the kids I'd helped for 2 trimesters suddenly pulled out a ring and proposed. I was stunned. He seemed heartbroken, but we never had that kind of connection. I graduated soon after and left tutoring, feeling sad but also a little relieved. Luckily it wasn't in public, so the rejection wasn't humiliating. He was a sweet kid, and I felt bad for him. A year later, I spotted him at a cafe with a female friend and felt genuinely happy for him. Whoa, some people really propose without even asking their partners or discussing marriage beforehand. That's a terrible idea. Proposing to someone you're not even dating? That's on a whole other level. It's like the ultimate Hail Mary. Next story, I had been dating this girl for 3 years. Things were great, we clicked, made each other laugh, and everything felt right. I secretly found her ring size, asked her father's blessing, bought the ring, and planned the perfect private proposal at my apartment, knowing she hated public scenes. She was nerdy, like me, and once mentioned liking the sensory distorted brain map of body parts. So, I bought a homunculus sculpture on Etsy, decorated the place with candles and rose petals, and placed the ring on its oversized hands. When she walked in, I was on one knee. With everything set, I thought it was perfect. She, however, bolted out the door before I could even finish asking. I think she said no, but she left so fast I can't be sure. I was crushed, and the next 48 hours were an emotional whirlwind. Eventually, she called, saying she needed space. Weeks later, she came back and told me she'd thought it through and wanted to say yes. Now, that same homunculus sits on our mantle, and someday our kids will ask about it. Honestly, it's hilarious and fitting. They say you have to find someone who matches your quirks. I guess we did. Next story. This one wasn't exactly a no. When I proposed, she asked, "Did you get my mother's blessing?" Her dad had passed, and it hadn't even occurred to me that I'd need to ask her mom. Embarrassed, I put the ring away, nearly crashed the car driving us home, and ended up crying in her driveway. Months later, I asked her mom, and she said, "Yes. Now, we're planning our wedding." I still refuse to go back to that restaurant, though it seems everything worked out in the end. OP is probably married by now, so congratulations. That's all for today's stories. I hope you have a wonderful day or night, wherever you are. See you in the next one.